millions of years into those 7 days of creation, and it has the young Earth view. Hugh Ross, who we talked to, is one of the authors, and then the framework view, which is like, hey, don't even worry about anything. We'll just take it all, metaphorically or whatever. But here's the problem: is if you have death and disease before the fall, okay, 6,000 years ago, 4004 BC or whatever, according to James Ussher, if you have death and disease before the fall, you've got a real problem. And what we found was remember, thorns were an outcome of the fall. We have thorns 100 million years old. We have dinosaur bones where other dinosaurs are eating other dinosaurs. That's definitely death and problems. We have cancer in dinosaurs. This is a long time before the fall. So and here's the crux of the matter. If you have death and disease before the fall, there's no reason. It impacts the atonement. Then why in the world did Jesus die if death and disease is the natural order?
I know how they're going to respond to it. Can I just do it for him?
Yeah.
We're talking human death.
When
Okay.
Ken Ham, there's a great, if you look at the video, the great debate, you have Ken Ham and Hugh Ross going at each other furiously.
That would be funny.
And Ken Ham says to Hugh Ross, who believes you can have these millions of years.
They're both Christian.
They're both Christian. And he goes, and they're both inerrantist. They believe the Bible's inerrant. And he goes, I would hate to worship a God like yours, Hugh Ross. Go ahead, Jim. What were you going to say?
Oh gosh, I forgot what I was going to say.
Well,
you're talking about death and disease in general. They would want to back it up to just human infallibility. But humans have been around 300,000 years. So I mean, let's not go back to the millions of years old thorn. Let's go up to 300,000 years, unless we agree that the first humans, 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens, that's when Adam and Eve started, or that's when the first human started, if you believe the Garden of Eden to be allegorical. That's when the fall, right?
True is an expert on this stuff, so.
Yeah, Myron is a case that you can't have physical death before the fall. I was thinking about. I don't know that that's even really written anywhere. Actually, I think that's kind of an extrapolation.
Well, God says, "You shall surely die when you ate the fruit."
Right, and then they didn't.
Well, it can be
physical death.
No, it can. I think a lot of Christian interpretations, correct me if I'm wrong, that they probably would have been immortal had they not eaten the fruit, even allegorical or literal. They basically were immortal had they not eaten the fruit? Yes.
Yeah, that's what's up.
And so, what caused their death, even though it happened, decades later?
Well, Ross would say they died a spiritual death. So
I think there's a case that can be made for that, but I think a stronger Christian position is the other one. And as for like Homo sapiens,
which other one?
The 7 day
creation view.
But you guys believe in a 6,000 year universe, right?
I think there's flexibility there.
Well, I hope so, because that's insane.
We're taking a few months.
I would insane. I mean, I'll debate you about it.
Special treaty there.
But as for like Homo sapiens being 300,000, there's so much genetic load. I don't know if you know anything about genetic load, but there's so much genetic load in the human genetics that we can't. 300,000 years that we wouldn't even sustain that. We'd be dead.
Well, first of all, there's no Adam and Eve. The Homo sapien population. This is genetics. This is science. Never got below 2,000. And then they expanded out.
So the very first human, there were 2,000 of them.
Yeah,
those kinds of figures.
There were 0 one day, and the next day there were 2,000.
And it's very hard to understand. Maybe you can answer this true.
Those kinds of
That's
figures
true.
constantly changing.
It's constantly changing. That's a
test.
test.
The same day, 2,000 humans.
Do you understand this question?
Oh, no.
How you go from no Homo
From
sapiens
0
to
to
2,000?
2,000. You have to start with 2.
How?
You would
What do you
think.
mean?
I don't care if it's a 500 or 2,000. How do you go from 0 to 2? What James is asking? Why not go to 0 to 2? Why 0 to 500 or 2,000 or whatever?
Here's what I'm saying.
I don't understand why
If you
you're
take
asking me.
my understanding of the evolutionary position is that there were, hundreds of thousands of years ago, some type of homonym or some type of humanoid type, 90, almost human, not quite human.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't quite call it human. One chromosome off. or
You're on it.
something. Okay, now, so you can't start.
And they gave birth to an offspring.
Okay.
That was what?
It had that one extra, whatever it was.
Just
gene or
enough where we can call it Homo
barely
sapien
call it
sapien.
human.
Yep.
And that day there
Sounds
were
weird,
2,000
right?
of them.
If I showed you a piece of
Well, wait a
paper,
minute, that day
okay.
there were
Do you
2,000 of
understand
them.
his question?
No, you're saying no. That was a genetic mutation in just one organism.
Exactly, not 2,000.
Nope.
But the
So
research says
you can't say that the
2,000.
humans,
Okay,
if you define humans
those
humans
kinds of
that
figures
way.
are constantly changing. I mean, 2005.
That's the beauty of science. It constantly updates
Let's
based
just
on.
take the
2,000 or
2,000. Let's take the
10,000.
2,000.
Like you said, they're constantly changing.
This is the
I
theological
don't
discussion.
understand-
If we
it's not
talk
that I'm not
science,
saying it's not true. I don't understand it. If that's true, that you have something almost human, you can't barely call, and then you have that one gene or whatever it was that's barely human. You're not going to have 2,000 that day. You're going to have one,
right?
Well,
and then that gene will be passed on.
I'm saying, the problem is there's
Say something.
not
You need to talk
a
to me.
line
Get in
where
here.
it's one generation.
Britt's got something she doesn't want us-
Then boom, next
You go ahead.
generation is human.
Get in here.
It's a gradual divergence.
I'm talking it anyway.
Oh.
Get in
Just
here.
jump in.
Right.
Where we have way
Oh,
back.
there were
Who
never
talks
less than
the loudest?
2,000.
But all of modern
same problem.
is descended from one single female. That is
James, James,
at least as far as psychosis.
I was going to bring up like a similar situation. People, for example, with blue eyes
Uh-huh.
haven't always existed.
Right.
Right.
That was a mutation.
Right.
And then, so it had to happen in one person.
Yeah, you wouldn't say there's
First.
never less than
But
2,000
it
people
doesn't,
with blue eyes.
it doesn't matter
Sure there
what
was.
we think. The specialists, the genetic researchers have concluded that there was 2, 10, whatever, like you said, it fluctuates. But here's the important thing. It was so problematic that, you know what the Christian theologians came up with? They're always pulling a rabbit out of their head. They go, okay, well, we can't dispute the evidence that there was thousands of people, Homo sapiens at one time. There was a federal Adam and Eve among those 2,000. I mean, isn't that just brilliant apologetic? I mean, yeah,
A
federal
representative.
Yeah.
I can add something here from Science Daily. The most robust statistical examination to date of our species' genetic links to quote-unquote mitochondrial Eve, the maternal ancestor of all living humans, confirms that she lived about 200,000 years ago.
It's been
Every
updated to
person
300, but
is-
yeah.
Every human on this planet today is believed by these scientists, not Christians, to have descended from a single female.
And there's also a mitochondrial
So
atom.
Yes.
the day that there was that single
Well, now
human,
it's,
there
now
wasn't
there
2,000 of them
is
that day.
closer together than they.
I don't even-
Does that make sense?
I don't even understand why we're moving on.
Well, the number is, and I've heard different numbers, but the human population has never been less than 2,000.
It got really low during one of the ice ages.
No,
It got really
nothing
low.
that's here today was there then. We don't know any of
But
this.
it just
It's
doesn't.
science.
I'm not understanding the argument. I'm just, obviously, I'm not understanding the argument.
But anyway, we can go on it. What did,
Yeah,
did he
that's-
answer your question? You were taking notes. Did he answer your question?
All right, so-
Satisfactory?
He said simply look at the state of the world. He said, okay, just look at the world. It's self-evident that it's a fallen nature, right? The Andromeda galaxy in a couple billion years is going to hit the Milky Way, and it's going to do shit that makes this look like cupcake time. You see what I'm saying? This might seem like fallen nature, but this is how the universe works. It's a constant state of
What about human nature? Human nature on this planet today is broken.
turn on Animal Planet and look how other animals do to each other. What we do to each other is no
The
different.
fallen world, the fall affected.
Are lions fallen?
Yes.
Yes.
That's what they believe.
They don't have souls. How were they fallen?
The world.
The world is.
Okay, does anyone here trace felines back to their hominids? Has it been going on all the time? Was it going on before?
Do you know the noetic, what it's meant by the noetic effects of sin? When Adam fell, it not only affected his,
We got to nail down when Adam existed.
you know,
We don't have time for that.
Anyway.
Okay, yeah.
it
Anyway,
affects-
let me move
what
on.
it does is it affects your emotions, your will, and your intellect. So sin, the fall affects your whole personality. So that, as James said, as atheists,
The switch back
we
there.
are suppressing the
Behind that
truth
door.
because we're not even capable of. Am I right, James? We're not even capable of receiving spiritual.
No, that's
You're not.
Yeah, did you say?
Yeah, I see. All right, so
That's Calvinist doctrine.
Okay, let's do this. We're kind of running short on time. I want to kind of hear the rest of Jim's.
let me just hit the wave tops then. We don't even have to talk about it. If the world's in need of redemption and it plays humans are the sole cause of all the problems on earth, humans have only been around for, tip of the iceberg compared to the total age of the earth. Look at the parts of the world where Christian values rule. U.S. religiosity is plummeting. We can all agree on that. It's becoming a more secular society. We're modeling Europe. Our crime rates are at historic lows, especially violent crime rates. Look at Europe. Is like Scandinavia is 60 to 80% atheist, and they have some of the lowest crime rates and the most prosperous citizens. So that's out. The forbidden tree, it's okay to think of the whole Garden of Eden story as symbolic, but not the vicarious redemption. I don't see why one is good for the goose and why is one good for the gander. If one can be symbolic, the other one can be symbolic. Second thing is, if the resurrection itself, just that actual physical event, is what, it's not why he did it, just the actual physical event of being resurrected. It happened, half a dozen times in the Bible. Jesus wasn't the only one that was resurrected. So were those just as miraculous, and were those meant to?
Well,
was
Lazarus,
special?
Lazarus was resurrected, but he died.
They make a distinction between resurrection.
Lazarus wasn't the only one that was resurrected.
But everybody that was resurrected died. Right?
Both of them are miracles, but what makes Jesus unique is he received a glorified, resurrected body that doesn't have the impact of sin.
And didn't die, went straight to, just like Mary and Elisha and Moses and.
Well, no, it's the body, the type of body he received, the glorified, resurrected body that we will also.
You'll forgive me
one
for
day.
just saying that's kind of weak, though.
Well, no, I mean,
yeah.
it's just the others in the Old Testament. There were some cases of resuscitation also.
And what Dylan? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, last thing, what Dylan said. He said, of all the questions, and I said that was a rudimentary. It was kind of a sophomoric question. It was just, it wasn't scholarly. Yeah, Dylan and I admitted that, especially at the end, where when he was talking about the vicarious redemption wasn't even necessary, and his whole response that ended with "it's a mystery," just it wasn't really satisfactory. Right?
Not at all.
Yeah.
And I'll say that I wasn't satisfied with that answer either. And really, what it comes down to is he said, whether or not you believe the type of literature that Genesis is, so let's say I believe that Bill is this great prophet, and I believe solely, and what he said,
flesh and blood is not revealed to you.
Whoa, hold on. I'm getting at a point. So, yes, Christianity is rooted in the fact that you believe in Christ, repent, and get saved. So let's say I believe that Bill is this person, and then somebody says, "Oh, but Bill believes this about the world." Well, I believe in a different version of what he believes. So you believe in origin of the universe one way, but to say that you can believe Genesis another way, specifically 1 and 2.
Yeah, I think
it's kind of saying Jesus believed it to
be.
be this way, but you don't necessarily have to.
Yeah.
And I think there's a disconnect there.
I think what Jesse was trying to say, and I don't think I'm reading between the lines on it, was not that you ought to believe that, but could you be a Christian and still believe it? Maybe you should have said maybe not a very good Christian, but theoretically you could be a Christian and be wrong about that.
So every Christian in this room believes Adam and Eve actually existed and ate a piece of fruit and caused the fall?
I don't know.
Yeah? Is there anyone that doesn't?
I don't know.
One.
That doesn't believe what?
I would just say that
I believe it could be
that's
symbolic.
a lesson about God and his relationship to people, so I have no idea whether it's literally true or not.
Yeah. I love you guys, but wow. Wow.
So Conrad says he doesn't know if it's literally true or not. I wouldn't say
There's an expansion on an explosion.
Christian if he's not sure about that.
And the singularity wasn't nothing. The singularity wasn't nothing. It was everything.
You're completely at odds with science.
Was it? Science breaks down. Like I told you, the singularity, relativity, and quantum mechanics breaks down at the singularity.
When you talk about Genesis, it was just ripped off. When they were in the Babylonian captivity, they just ripped off you've heard of the Enuma Elish?
Yes.
The Babylonian myth?
The Enuma Elish, yeah.
Yeah. So it talks about the watery chaos, and their kings lived to be 70,000 years. So you wonder why, Methuselah and them or Noah is 600 years old, and on his POF profile, he won't date anybody less than 400. Anyway. It's just like they just said, oh my gosh, when we're an inferior culture, we won't make our king 70,000. We'll just make ours like 600 sounds good. This is just myth. This is just stuff that is... And they meant, when they said 7 literal days, I don't agree with you, Ross. I believe they meant 7 days. When they said the sun was created on day 4 and the earth was created on day 1, they're only off 500 million years.
When,
I mean,
Bill,
they were serious about
when
it.
you say it's just a myth, though, this is,
course.
I can see what
Genesis
they're
1
thinking.
through 11 is
It's that
pre-existing.
anti-willingness to think miraculously
But
or
this is-
supernatural, anti-supernatural mentality.
This-
I don't
you
say
can't-
it's just a
you
myth.
can't
I
even
say
get-
it's just not satisfactory
Jim,
for
you
me.
can't even get the earth and the sun right. You get those wrong. You can't have the earth on day 1.
Context.
Not have a sun 4 days later. Here's the
Hermeneutics.
thing with Hugh Ross. He does what exegetical gymnastics, which means that he goes, oh my God, I got a problem here because I know the sun was created 500 million years before the earth, so this can't be right. So he goes, well, what it meant was there was a translucent atmosphere, and then on day 4 the sun appeared. It just became apparent. Obviously the sun was created well before the earth. So and that's what drives Ken Ham crazy. It's just like, and you guys at ICR, right?
Yeah, in my view, you're either youngest creationist or you think it's
Right.
kind of mythical. Like, there's no Hugh Ross nonsense. I don't see that.
But how do you reconcile the earth?
I give it a possibility on a scale. I don't say
I'm
it's
just a
myth.
youngest creationist.
So you believe the earth was created on the first day?
To me, it's easy, it's convenient. You know, that works. Like, that works within my view, and I think it's a rational view. If you want to talk about evidence, I can talk to you about evidence.
Sure.
And so in my view, you're a youngest creationist or you're a mythicist when it comes to Genesis, and that's I think are the two consistent positions.
By the way, where he works, the Institute for Creation Research, you can take a tour of his
You can, yeah.
facility, and they have fossils and all sorts of cool things.
Can day really not mean more than one thing? Like, I actually am on your side. I just think. Like,
How do you define the day? You know?
I just don't think
Well, see,
that's
Sure.
consistent at
Here's
all.
the thing: if
okay.
you cram millions of years into the sun on the 4th day, you've got
That's not what I mean.
Yeah.
That's not actually.
you got a problem.
Okay,
What I meant.
so I mean,
You got the
I don't know if
plants
you
created
atheists
on
are
day
interested in
3,
this.
Yes.
and the sun on day 4.
Um,
Well, they can't exist for 1,000,000 years without suns.
So the classic book, if you guys want to go that route and get into creation days and stuff like that, is 6 Days That Divide the World, I think is the name of it, by John Lennox. And then you have another book to suggest?
Here's
no,
one.
I've read that book.
And you
I've
read this, right?
I've read
A
Hugh
Matter
Ross,
of
I've read
Days.
that. There's all the alternate interpretations of nonsense.
But Hugh Ross wrote this where he tries to explain.
So, yeah,
But if
can
you
I
wanted
just-
to
can I just
survey
talk
the
about-
different
can I just talk
ways
about
of looking at that,
interpretations
that's a good overview.
So, in Genesis, it talks about Yom, and it talks about a day. Well, obviously, he knows that the language, he knows that it's like the author, if you take Moses the author or not, we're just talking about interpretation right now. It's like the author knows, okay, I know Yom means a few different things in my language, so I'm going to bend over backwards and say morning and evening. It's very clear. And you try to say, well, it's 6 different days separated by millions of years. There's no reason to infuse that into the days. It's
And you have the
consecutive
order
days.
being wrong still if you're trying to make it work that way.
Yeah, well, like the plants on day 3 of creation.
Well, we're not talking about scientific. We're not talking about.
Right.
We're just talking about purely looking at the time cycle.
But I mean, you got some egregious things like they have dinosaurs and man created on day 6. This first Australopithecine was created 65 million years ago, 6 million years ago. The dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago. So it's not like the Flintstones at the Creation Museum, in Kentucky. You don't have man and dinosaurs existing. But if you look at the Bible, look at the text, it has man and dinosaurs created on day 6. Am I not right?
Right.
I would take
So
it.
we would say 65 million years. Well, you're getting that from like dating methods. You're getting it from
Science,
the layers. And it's not the evidence isn't going to fit perfectly, but you can have a perfectly rational position as a year.
60 million years off again. 6 million years from the first
so
Australopithecine.
your dating methods. I can get into this. So your dating methods are going to assume uniformitarianism, which assumes naturalism, which assumes a natural origin. So it all comes down to what are you assuming when you look at the evidence in the first place.
Well, we look at the peninsula in Mexico where we see a clear iridium border, which shows it was a meteorite that hit the
There's a
friggin'
lot of that
Yucatan Peninsula.
Okay, for one thing, I mean, we've never observed millions of years of erosion. We've only been around, a few thousand years in the first place. And we've seen a lot of these things that supposedly happen, take a long time to occur, happen really quickly. You're familiar with all of this. So there's plenty of reason for all of that.
That's
You know all of this.
Yeah, St. Helen's Testament to Creation.
Maybe a dumb question here, but if Jesus himself talked in parables, why are we trying so hard to make Genesis work literally?
Because
I'm
no,
really
here's why.
struggling with that.
Because
I mean,
Jesus
Adam and Eve and-
Validated, am I not right? Noah, he talked about Noah like he was a real person.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And the New Testament authors use it for a
Do you
lot
see
of
what I'm
their
saying?
theology.
Yeah, but you could, that, he's not trying to necessarily prove the literal truth of it, right? Again, he's teaching, right?
Yeah, he's teaching
He's
that
teaching
it's
You think he might be making it literal?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's not true, I just don't understand why we're so hung up on it when so much of the Bible is obviously
Because
allegory
we
and
have
parable,
what's called
you know?
fundamentalists that believe every word is in
Well,
there.
because of the genre of the literature. Jesus is, when he's telling parables, he's not trying to tell history. In different parts of the Bible, they're trying to tell history, and I think Genesis is obviously trying to teach history just because it's how it's written.
I don't know, when I read the creation story of the Bible, it does not sound like somebody saying, now here's exactly how the world was created. That's not how it reads to me, but maybe that's just me.
Yeah, well, there are two creation accounts of Genesis.
Right.
One of the things that kind of bothered me a little bit, maybe rethinking my position a little bit in reading Justin's book, and then I also really came up first of all in the debate we watched last month for me with William Lane Craig. Craig starts off with talking about historical evidence and evidential things about the resurrection, and he says, now remember that debate, he starts off by saying, now most Christians don't talk about this issue. They don't consider this issue because they have a personal revelation to them that tells them the resurrection is true. And then he said, which I agree with him on this, but then he says, and that's perfectly acceptable. And I went, well, now wait a minute. Because, and then Brierley says something along the same lines. And so I'm thinking, part of this to me, I think maybe is a pendulum swinging too far out of my Mormon experience. So that everything in Mormonism is based on this burning in the bosom, this experience. You know it's true because you feel it's true. And don't look at the evidence, whatever you do, just keep sticking with that feeling. And so when somebody talks about, you ask me now how I know he lives within my heart, oh, come on, I don't want to hear that. Because the Muslims have that, the Mormons have that, But I was thinking, after listening to the interview I did with Justin and kind of rethinking that a little bit, maybe I'm swinging the pendulum too far in the opposite direction. That any religion that didn't transform people's lives radically and create this type of resonating with them of the truthfulness of it would be suspect. So let's say you have all the facts, nobody disputes the facts, but so what? It doesn't change anybody's life. Well, that probably is not going to be a true religion either. So maybe what I should be looking at is this evidential, call it feelings, call it the spiritual testimony, or whatever you want to call it. Maybe that is necessary for something to be true, but not sufficient. Not sufficient because all religions have it. But if you have a religion that doesn't have it, you have a problem because it's a necessary part of something that would be true, but not sufficient on that.
I would think you have to be careful going with that line because there are things that can change your life that are not religious.
Exactly. So it would be necessary but not sufficient to show it's true. Because you're right, there are things that can radically change your life in positive ways that have nothing to do with any religion. And this came up in the I don't know if you listened to the podcast with the AA encounter. The policeman that was the agnostic who was interviewing him. He said, AA transformed my life, and it made me open to this whole idea of God, but I don't buy it. But I go back and undeniably something happened, and you might not want to call it spiritual, I don't know what you call it, but my life radically changed. I would say what he experienced should be true of a religion if it's possibly true.
I guess
But it doesn't mean it's true, though.
This would also be the question of, okay, if you're raised Christian, you're always Christian. If you're raised Mormon, you're always Muslim. Mormon, you're raised Islam. You're raised Muslim, you're always Muslim. There's no change taking place there. That's just who you are. Is that in any way if your religion doesn't change you, it could still be true. Like obviously, you can say a Christian was born a Christian, raised a Christian, has had no fundamental change. They're still correct.
Well, it's not so much that your life was bad and now it's good, or some kind of change in that way, but this sense that you know intuitively, that you know spiritually. Most Christians, and this bothers me about Christians, most Christians don't care about evidence. I go, well, come on now. This is the most important thing. Well, no, I just know it's true. Well, I don't like that answer. I don't think it's not sufficient. It's not a sufficient answer. But maybe it isn't necessary. It's necessary. If no Christian had that, then maybe that would be enough right there to rule out Christianity.
James, I think what you're actually referring to might be something along the lines of intellectual honesty. So therefore, I mean, it goes into the whole, if it's true for me, it must be true, but that's not, I think you're going a little more in depth with it, where it's like, it is somewhat necessary for there to be some authenticity to the belief, if, like, the person believes in it with all their heart.
You kind of have the same thing with the how many apocalyptic prophets have world religions following them? Not a whole lot. It doesn't mean it's true, but if you don't have that, because you have other world religions, you have Islam as a world religion growing very rapidly, right? So I don't believe that's true. But if you don't have that, if you have the whole story of Jesus except nobody believed and followed, and there's like 15 people in some cult out in Montana that believe it, that might be evidence it's not true, because if it really was that transformational, it should be something that's impactful for a good number of people. That's just me thinking off the top of my head out loud. It's things I've been wrestling with, listening to this, and since last month.
Maybe comes back to her earlier question about the resurrection. It all hinges on that. If there had been no resurrection, would there have been a worldwide movement? We think there's a lot of guys were cowering because they were afraid for their lives.
Well, you have worldwide movements with Islam,
Yeah.
so does that mean that the angel did speak to Muhammad in the cave?
Yes.
No, that's the dark side. We're with the force.
I think Islam is more under, threat of death. If somebody's an apostate, if they move away from their faith, they're
That's a good
threatened
point.
with their life.
But there are people
So-
who believe it not under compulsion.
Mormonism, then, you could just insert Mormonism. It wasn't, you'll be killed if you don't follow Joseph Smith. Except for spiritually, it was you're going to get tarred and feathered.
Right.
here,
But with the
so.
Mormonism, I would have been happy to stay a Mormon if it wasn't for the evidence.
Well, that's my
Yeah.
point. I'm just saying, like, if we use Islam and then like let Islam off the hook because, well, you're threatened with death. I just say, well, then let's look at Mormonism. Mormonism, you don't have that, but you still have followers.
True.
So I'm just saying, like, this doesn't prove Christianity. Or
Right.
it helps. You're just saying it's unevidenced, not like this.
But
is
you would have to,
everything,
instead of completely discounting that, maybe I should look at it as it should be an element of a true religion.
Yeah.
But just not sufficient.
But you're
not
just
by
adding
itself.
that
If that's
as a
all you
more
have.
burden of proof on religion.
Exactly.
Yeah, which I think is good.
Yeah.
Now, when I was in church, ironically, we had a poster up in our youth group that said, "What is popular is not always right. What is right is not always popular." So I kind of, I think I get the point you're trying to make, but I think also there could have been what if there was another messianic claimant that was right, but he wasn't charismatic, but he wasn't a good speaker and didn't get a lot of followers. That could be a thing, and Jesus happened to have a personality and people liked him, and he was actually factually incorrect.
And I think we can also look at the excuse my Christian lingo, but the fruit that it produces. One person can look at what Muslims produce, what's coming out of that culture there. Is it freedom? Is it liberty? Is it life? What's coming out of the Christian culture? What's coming out of that?
All that's not good, though. I mean, there's a lot of the atheists are going to be looking at that saying that Christianity does a lot more harm than good.
That argument helps Buddhism in a way, actually.
So one person can, judge a religion based on what's being produced. What's changing in the person's life? What's changing in the culture?
That's a good point. Good point. Well, we're out of time, unbelievably. But this is one more good reason that we might ought to consider hanging out at Hooligans Thursday.
Yeah, for sure.
So that runs, if you can only come in for 30 minutes or an hour, it starts at, was it 4 to 10?
No, 4 to 8.
4 to 8, I'm sorry, 4 to 8.
4 to 8.
4 to 8, if you are enjoying the drinks, you may be even there longer. So. But 4 to 8 is when they meet, and different people are coming in and out during that time. And we're not upstairs anymore, right? We're downstairs, right?
It depends.
If Mark shows up, we're downstairs because he's got a
Okay.
knee problem. He can't walk
Yeah.
up the
Okay.
stairs.
But you will also meet some atheists that don't come here, that go there. So you'll meet some new people. And I think this is a good example tonight of every discussions. The last couple of months seems to be building on each other and being better to me. I don't, so. Getting into the issues, I think we deal with the issues a little bit more than Brierley does in one respect, that, a little bit hard hitting and challenging each other. So
The book for next month is.
yeah, let me give you the book for next month. I'm gonna skip the video. I'll email you the video. If you could do me a favor, this is the book for next month. Jesus Interrupted by Bart Ehrman. Now Bart Ehrman is the one man most responsible single human to have converted or deconverted Bill to atheism. So Bart Ehrman loves Bill and has a wonderful plan for his life. And,
Well, he has a plan for Bill's life. I don't know if he loves him.
yes.
No, I heard about this guy. I was in Sunday school class at Colonial Baptist Church. I can still remember. He goes, Bart Ehrman's going to be in the Barnes Noble tonight. One of the guys in the class said, I went, Bart Ehrman, who's he? So I went there, and there was like 100 people, and I went, I was just blown away. Remember, I'm a fundamentalist Christian, hardcore, and he just blew me. Within a half hour, I went, I know nothing about Christianity. And I read every one of his books, and he just blew me away.
And then blew you off.
And then, he debated, by the way, here at SMU, Wallace, who is a scholar over there at Dallas Theological Seminary. And so I gave him, my humble little gift, my little offering of a poster of the old well at UNC. And I said, you tell it, Sue. I mean, when I went to...
No, you tell it so well. Go ahead.
But didn't I say, Bart, I really love you and adore you? And he goes, what? Are you going to sign about a book? Just get out of my... Did he say that?
Pretty much blew you off.
Just blew me off. And I said, but I've lost girlfriends in your name. I've proclaimed your name in Sunday school classes and been thrown out. I've suffered for you, and you can treat me like this.
You should have shown your tattoo. Dude. Show the tattoo.
Now let me say this.
Show you how atheists are, right?
Yeah.
There, right?
The last part of the interview is about 11 minutes. I will send you the link. We talk about Bart Ehrman. Also, Justin Brierley says of all the topics that's come up, this is the one that most troubled him. He talks about the Christmas he spent reading and getting ready for the interview. And so my question to him is going to be, well, how do you either resolve it or learn to cope with it? And he's going to answer that question, but then we're going to read the book, or one of his books, Jesus Interrupted, by Bart Ehrman. That's our book, if you want to make note of that. And I'll send you links like I normally do.
And by the way, if you look at YouTube, just Bart Ehrman YouTube, he's debated every atheist out there just about. He's a brilliant debater, and he, does YouTube videos to churches where he goes and just tells you about early Christianity, how it wasn't monolithic, it was all over the place, and just, he's the real deal. This isn't somebody like Robert Price, the mythicist, who teaches at Johnny Newman University with 5 guys in a trailer. This guy teaches at University of North Carolina, a research university, a real university.
And interestingly, Bart Ehrman was one of our best supporters to debunk mythicism. So he wrote the book, Did Jesus Exist? And so here he is, a liberal, agnostic, but he makes probably the most compelling case in print that Jesus was a historical person that really existed. Now, he doesn't believe he was the Son of God, but he does believe that there's just overwhelming evidence that there
and
was a man.
he came to fame with the book Misquoting Jesus, which is kind of his scholarly books, The Orthodox Corruption of Scripture, which is a fantastic book, and it shows you all the ways that Christians corrupted our scriptures by trying to combat docetic heresies and a lot of heresies in the church, and how they did. And I asked Barnum personally. I said, do these, and the Christians would just blow this off. Oh, these changes don't affect the real meaning of the text. Bullshit. I asked Barnum. He said he could make a list as long as his arm of changes in the text which affected doctrines. We'll name you one real quick, where it says, "No one knows the time or hour, neither the angels nor the Son." Well, Christians, when they read this, found this problematic, and they omitted that "nor the Son." So that is a great example of a textual variant that does affect. And another one would be the bloody sweat in Luke, where he's sweating blood and so forth. That was added later. So, and of course, the obvious ones are the woman caught in adultery isn't in our. It's not until the 8th century we see that in our earliest manuscripts. Oh, and he's an expert. There's only like 24 of these guys in the world, so he's an expert on textual manuscripts. He knows Syriac, Greek, Hebrew. He knows several languages, and he's an expert in that.
One more housekeeping thing.
Yeah. Neither the angels nor the Son.
We're considering doing some stuff. Really, we don't have time at this hour to get into it, probably, but next time we meet, we're going to talk about the possibility of possibly videoing and running this live and letting other people participate in it. It's growing. It's outgrowing the room right now, and I think it's the tip of the iceberg. 3 of you are here because you found out about it from a guy who lives in London. If the word gets out, I think a lot of people get interested. Nobody in the world is doing what we're doing as far as broadcasting something like this. Justin Brierley has his pub meeting, which is something similar to what we're doing. Not exactly the same, but I don't think anybody in the world is doing this. And I think it's helpful. It's helpful for me, and I think that it's something that we would like to share with others. We'll talk about how that would work and the pros and cons of it next
So
month.
a podcast could be really exciting. We'd have people, write in comments and so forth, and it could really take us to the next level and make this thing really exciting.
It could be people could participate without having to live in Arlington or in North Texas. So
I know a dozen people right now who would like to join, but I'm afraid to invite you more because of the space. Right?
I've got a longtime atheist friend lives on the East Coast that said he would be at every one of these if there was a way to be out here.
So this way he can be.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we'll talk about that. There's some drawback negatives. We'd have to actually be on time. We would. I don't want to spoil the spontaneity. I don't want you sitting on your hands or being afraid to say because there's a camera going or something like that. I don't want to ruin what we have, but I'm thinking, can we maximize it and let other people be involved in it as well?
There would be so many comments in the live chat that we would have to actually set a timer to where we only talk like 5 minutes on an issue and
Exactly.
then roll right off and hit something else. It would turn into probably just answering Q&As all day, which might be cool too.
But then hooligans.
Maybe
Yeah.
Maybe the Atheist Edge could make a program out of just answering the surplus questions.
Well, this will in the next couple of weeks. This will be on Atheist Edge, but pre-recorded is never as good as live. You bump up in the hierarchy. Any live show gets seen by. The algorithm. More people and more people see it. Yeah, it like let's say you have 100 subscriptions that you're subscribed to on YouTube. If one's live, it goes to the top of your feed. You see it first, so it'll get more exposure for us.
Now, I can take feedback now if you're going to say, James, if you decide that this is going to be a video of this and I'm out of here, I'm camera shy or something like that. I'm going to listen to you. I'm not totally convinced myself right now. It means more work for us to make this happen, but it might be. There's already a lot of work in putting this on, and it's limited to what we have in the room right now. And if we put some more work in it, maybe we could potentially reach hundreds or thousands, maybe.
Well, this is just an idea for you to think about. Is there even a consideration of keeping this as it is, but having a separate session that is the video thing? Because they would be very different in nature.
You think?
I don't think we could have the kind of interaction we have here in a video thing, but I hate to not do that because it's such a good
we just
idea,
experiment and see where it falls.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a question from another of our atheists, Chris, who's also a former Christian. He says there are a couple of places in the book where you point to humanity's search for something more, be it a higher purpose, a deeper love beyond chemical reactions.
etc. But what is it about all these longings that imply that what's being longed for is actually real? For instance, if I commit myself wholeheartedly to search for Atlantis, does that mean that Atlantis exists necessarily?
Yeah, it's another great question. I was in so this was the 4th chapter of the book where I talk about why the general search in humanity's history for purpose and meaning, transcendence, maybe points to the fact that maybe there is something out there to be found. And it was C.S. Lewis who I think summed it up very well with his argument from Desire when he said a duckling is made to swim. Well, there is such a thing as water. People have the desire for sex. Well, there is such a thing as sex. People get hungry. Well, there is such a thing as food. If we find in ourselves a desire which no other thing in this world can satisfy, then it's evidence that we are made for another world. He was essentially saying, if we find all these other desires in ourselves which are met by something, why then do we find this desire across humanity for the transcendent, for ultimate purpose, ultimate meaning, if that one thing is the one that doesn't get met? And so I think there is an argument to be made that the way that we see all our other desires being met in some way, it's a strange thing. It's a strange thing for evolution to have foisted on us a grand illusion in this one area that there is no God, when the testimony of human culture over millennia has been people searching for and saying they found God. Now is that evidence that there is such a thing as God out there at the end of that search? Well, no, I can't give you a definitive proof from this particular argument that that's the case. But all I'm saying is it's a strange thing if we have this deep inbuilt desire as humans to look for the transcendent, to yearn for something more, if there is nothing more.
And if you think of the opposite for a moment, if all of our desires, if all of our value system, all of our beliefs, all of our emotion, if it's merely chemical, biological reaction, it's hard to live a life with that reality.
And the reality is most people, even if they call themselves atheists, don't live life like that. They do live life as though there really are ultimate facts about right and wrong, that humans have real inherent dignity and value, that these aren't just illusions foisted on us by a random process of evolution. So I actually think that in reality, none of us live that way, as though it's all an illusion. And when we do, we are committed to a kind of nihilistic kind of philosophy, like it or not. But I mean, James, Chris sort of ends the question by asking, if I commit myself wholeheartedly to the search for Atlantis, does that mean necessarily that Atlantis exists? Well, no, of course it doesn't. We can be mistaken with the things that our senses tell us, or that our deep longings tell us. But if the vast majority of the population down through all of history has all had this strange desire to search for Atlantis, then we might want to say, well, that's interesting. Where's that coming from? Why is that? So it's a very different case. The search for God, the search for transcendence, the search for ultimate meaning and purpose. The fact that the most fundamental question you can ask is, why am I here? That's a bit different to someone just having a weird notion that they would like to look for the lost city of Atlantis. It feels like there's something at the center of all of us which is crying out, which is looking for something beyond just the physical to explain our place in the universe.
I appreciate that answer, and I've saved mine for the end. So coming from me, it has been said that the only Christian who never doubts are the ones who never think. In your 10 years of intense dialogue with leading atheists, what was the one subject or question that caused you the most soul-searching? Now, listening to your podcast, I know there's been numerous episodes or periods of time of wrestling with these things and having your own questions that come out of this. But if you could just pick one and say, wow, that was the one that really I struggle with, and then how did you either resolve it or either learn to cope with it?
Well, I tell one of these stories in the book. But I do remember the first time I booked in Bart Ehrman to come on the show. He's a well-known critic of the Bible. He was a Christian at one time, but lost his faith and he had a best-selling book out called Misquoting Jesus, and I managed to book him into the show. He was going to come on after Christmas, but I took the Christmas period to kind of read his book and familiarize myself with it. And this was reasonably early on in the life of the show, so I wasn't terribly familiar with the kinds of arguments he was bringing against the reliability of the New Testament, essentially. And it did, really, to some extent, gave me a lot of pause for thought. I probably had one or two sleepless nights where I was wrestling with the questions that he brought up, and is all this stuff about all the different copies of the scriptures and all the differences between them, and whether we can really know that we've got the words that Jesus ever spoke, and that
more
kind of
variants than there are manuscripts.
Yeah, all the variants in the manuscripts and everything else, and so I had booked in to have on with him a guy called Peter J. Williams, who's the warden of Tyndale House in Cambridge, who himself is a very renowned Bible scholar, but it's one of those cases. There's that proverb, isn't there, about one person's case seems to be strong until the other person comes to defend the other side, and that was a classic case of that, because Peter J. Williams, when he came on to have this dialogue with Bart Ehrman, really helped, I think, to put the other side. Bart's view of the scriptures is very much a glass half empty view, a pessimistic view of the reliability. Peter J. Williams was able to very much put the glass half full part of it by showing that so many of the issues that Bart raised in the book simply do not really have a bearing on the reliability of the New Testament, of the Gospels. And if you actually end up drilling down into Bart's thesis in that book, what you actually find behind all the kind of slightly sensationalist, if I'm honest, sort of theories and facts about the New Testament, there's only about 4 or 5 bits of the Gospels where he kind of really casts any doubt on whether we have the original manuscript, we have the original words of the manuscript. If you look in your Bible, any modern Bible will have a footnote saying some manuscripts say this and others say this. None of these differences make any difference whatsoever to any issue of doctrine. So for me, it turned out that there was really very little at stake in the end. And even Bart himself had an opinion on what the actual text would have originally said. So even Bart was somewhat certain about the actual what. And when you think about it, when you actually look at it objectively, you realise it's almost unbelievable that we have a detective system of textual criticism which actually recovers the original text to sort of a 99.9% sort of degree of certainty of what was originally written. And that's precisely because we have so many manuscripts with all their variations that we're able to do that. If we only had a few manuscripts, we wouldn't have as many variations, but we'd have nowhere near the same, if you like, confidence that we have that we can get back to the original text. Because of course, those original texts were written on papyrus. They decomposed a long time ago by the nature of the materials. But it's because we have this extraordinary rich heritage of all these copies that were made and distributed and so on, that we can have this detective process called textual criticism, which actually recovers the original things. And so I came out of that process having given me a lot of doubts and questions about Scripture, actually realizing when you dig into it, we are blessed with an incredibly strong textual sort of history for the Bible, when you take away some of the hype that sometimes certain people maybe put a spin on these things with.
Well, that answer is, especially that example, I think is going to resonate with our co-founder Bill Cluck, probably the one person most responsible. And sometime he'd like to sit down with you, I'm sure, and tell you the story. But it was Bart Ehrman, who he met in person in North Carolina, who basically was the one person who most influenced him to renounce Christianity and become an atheist. Right. So, of course, he came away from Bart's work with a different perspective on that, but I'm certain that example is going to resonate with Bill.
Well, I'd really be interested in Bill listening to some of the episodes I've had Bart on with different Christians, but maybe going right back to that first episode where I had him on with Peter J. Williams. This is going back to 2009, but if you search back in the Unbelievable Archive, you'll find it there. And they had just a fascinating interaction, which I think did help to put the other side of the coin in terms of Bart's book.
Well, thank you again for your time and being willing to address our questions. And before I let you go, did you have any, having done this about 10 years longer than we have, is there any advice you would have for our club, Atheist and Christian, any advice or encouragement for them?
I would just encourage you and say, well done for what you're doing. I think it's fantastic. It is so important to be friendly and to treat each other as human beings. And that starts with seeing each other in that kind of context, not as sort of people to be won over by an argument necessarily, but actually people with all your own kind of stuff going on in life, lots of other stuff going on. And so I would just encourage you to keep the conversation going in that kind of spirit. In the end of the day, there's always a limit to what apologetics can do. And I think comes a point of where if having the debate is no longer helpful to either side, then just be friends and try and get to know each other as well, because I think that ultimately most people are not simply won by an argument in either direction. There's a whole lot of stuff going on in most people's decisions when they either choose faith or reject faith, and I think it's very important that we treat each other as whole people, and in that sense keep being the best friend you can be to your atheist friend, and likewise atheist friends, keep doing your best to understand and be friendly and engage with your Christian friends and see what happens.
Great advice, Justin. Thanks again for your time. We look forward to future podcasts to be listening on this side, and maybe down the road we have you back on for your next book.
Thank you very much for having me, James, and thank you for choosing the book for your book club.
God bless you.
An unholy thing